everyone! Welcome back to Story Hive. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Let's jump into today's story. I was an accidental child, so my parents beat me and never loved me. I ran away, and now, 8 years later, they want to reconnect. English is not my first language, and I'm sorry if there are any mistakes. I am a 24-year-old female who has spent a significant amount of time apart from my parents. Now they want to reconnect. For some background, I'm the youngest of three children. I have two older brothers, 34 and 36 years old. Of course, I wasn't wanted, I was an accident, and my parents never bothered to hide that from me. They didn't care about me at all. Ever since I can remember, they would hit me for any minimal mistake or throw things at me. They never showed me love, didn't attend any events, and never helped me with school homework. I had to wash my clothes from around the age of 8 and cook my own food. At first I would look at other families and wonder why mine wasn't like that until I realized it was, but I just wasn't included. When I was 12, I realized I had to leave. I found my first job working 3 hours a day delivering newspapers, and I began to save that money to buy the things I really needed. When I was 14, I found a better job at a small grocery store that paid more for 4 hours, but I didn't quit my newspaper job. I was busy pretty much all day. My friends were the only ones who knew about this. I didn't have love for my family, but I considered them my family at this point. My parents stopped caring about me entirely. I didn't even exchange glances with them, and I spent my time at friends' houses, at work, or in the basement. I managed to save up quite a bit of money and bought a few things I needed, like a used smartphone and a used laptop. I explained my plan to my friends, and when I was 16, they even gave me some money and told me to text or call them every day. I had to break up with my first boyfriend and leave my friends behind. I still had a year left of high school and didn't have much money, but I ran away anyway. I admit I stole some food from my parents' house and ended up in a small town in the cheapest apartment I could find. I got a job and tried to survive, but I knew I couldn't stay there for long. I was a minor, and people would start looking for me. A few months later, I left that town too. I was 17 by that point and knew that once I turned 18, I'd be free forever from them. I arrived in another town, got another job, and once I turned 18, I decided to finish high school. Things were really hard, but I managed to make some new friends and get a new boyfriend, whom I'll call Dean. I ended up having a better life than I ever had. Eventually, I chose to buy a small apartment with my savings, enrolled in community college, studied a short career, got a good job, and stayed in the town. Maybe I could have done better if I had a better family, but I'm still happy with what I've achieved. Dean and I got married, and now we both have good paying jobs and are saving up for the future. We want to have our own restaurant. He's a chef. With all that long context, I had been receiving calls from unknown numbers for a couple of weeks, calls I'd been rejecting and not paying much attention to. However, since I finally realized they were from the same number, I chose to pick up. I didn't recognize the man who was talking to me, but it was my older brother Ian. He asked me how things were going with me, and I answered that things were better than ever. He replied that he was glad to hear that. He then began to explain how my parents wanted to reconnect and wanted to hear from me. I refused completely, telling him that they were garbage to me. When he kept insisting, I hung up. They have been insisting for months. I blocked multiple phone numbers, Instagram accounts, Twitter accounts, and emails, but it was just not enough. They keep insisting. I put my accounts on private, but the phone calls kept coming. I ended up changing my number and haven't received anything since then. However, my friends from home are now telling me that my parents are bombarding their phones with calls and texts. I know this could be over if I agreed to a meeting with them, but I just don't want to. It's a closed chapter of my life. Update 1. Well, a lot happened a week after I posted here. I ended up calling my older brother Ian and agreed to a meeting with him at a restaurant in my town. I went with my husband Dean and my best friend Anna. To my surprise, he didn't bring my parents. We talked, and he asked why I didn't want to meet my parents. After he insisted, I ended up confessing everything. He apologized for not being able to do anything about it since he was away and didn't think my parents would do something like that. I told him it wasn't his fault and asked why my parents suddenly wanted to meet with me. He responded that he talked with them and they just said that they wanted their baby girl back. I don't remember a single time when they didn't call me something like a little brat, and they didn't understand why I didn't talk to them. I told him that couldn't be true, and he ended up telling me he tried to find out the real reason. Just a day later, Ian called and explained the real reason. After insisting, he managed to get the truth from them. They were in a hard spot financially and needed a lot of money. I don't know why, but they believed that I would give it to them. Ian told me he was really offended by this and said he would be cutting them off for good because now he sees who they really are. He asked me to keep in contact, and I agreed. I chose to unblock my parents to send them a voicemail. I basically laughed at them for believing that I would give them money. I told them how awful parents they were and sent them an ironic good luck with their debts and their lives. I advised them not to mess things up. I blocked them again, and all I know is that they listened to it and were really angry. Update 2. A few weeks after my last update, life continued on its unpredictable course. Dean and I had settled into our routines, our restaurant dreams becoming more tangible with each passing day. We were busy, but in a good way, working hard and enjoying our little victories together. Then, out of nowhere, my past knocked on the door again. The calls from unknown numbers had stopped after I changed my phone number, but the relentless attempts from my parents didn't end there. My friends back home were still being bombarded with calls and texts. It was like they were trying every possible way to reach me, but I was determined to maintain my distance. One day, I received an unexpected visit from Ian. He showed up at our apartment, and for the first time since I'd last seen him, I felt a wave of apprehension mixed with curiosity. Ian looked weary but determined, and he came with a message that shook me to my core. Apparently, my parents' situation had worsened significantly. They were desperate, facing even more severe financial troubles, and their attempts to reach me had intensified. Ian relayed that my parents had been contacting him as well, expressing their regret and pleading for help. They were begging for money, claiming they had no other options. Ian was torn between his loyalty to his family and his own values. He told me he felt guilty for not doing more to help them when he had the chance, but he was also disgusted by their attempt to manipulate me. He said that despite everything, they were now genuinely remorseful and wanted to make amends. The depth of their desperation was evident, and Ian believed they might actually be sorry for their past actions. He encouraged me to consider at least hearing them out to perhaps give them one last chance. I listened to Ian, feeling a mixture of anger, confusion, and a strange, unsettling pity. I weighed the options, knowing that any form of contact could potentially reopen old wounds. But part of me was curious, could there be a shred of sincerity behind their plea for reconciliation? Or was it just another ploy to get what they needed? After a long night of deliberation, I decided to take a cautious step. I agreed to a mediated conversation with my parents, but only on the condition that it would be supervised and in a neutral public space. I wanted to see if there was any real remorse or just a continuation of their old patterns. When the day of the meeting arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. Dean and Anna came along for support, as they knew how difficult this was for me. My parents were there, looking older and more worn than I remembered. Their faces, lined with worry and perhaps a touch of shame, told a story of hardship that was new to me. As we sat down together, I felt a strange mix of apprehension and resolve. They started by apologizing for their past behavior, expressing their regrets and acknowledging the pain they had caused. They admitted their financial situation was dire and that their desperation had driven them to reach out to me. It was a raw emotional conversation, and I could see they were struggling to find the right words. Their pleas for forgiveness and their explanations of their current plight were heartfelt, but the memories of my childhood made it hard to fully accept their remorse. I listened, tried to understand their perspective, but my guard remained up. I needed to protect myself from being hurt again. In the end, we agreed on some terms. I made it clear that while I was willing to hear them out and offer some financial assistance under specific conditions, it didn't erase the past or mend our broken relationship. I needed to see genuine change and commitment to making things right before I could consider rebuilding any sort of relationship with them. As we parted ways, I felt a strange sense of closure. I wasn't sure if this was the beginning of a new chapter or simply the final acknowledgement of the past. But I knew that I had taken a step. Dean and Anna were there, as always offering their unwavering support. Life moved forward, and while the past continued to linger in some ways, I felt a renewed sense of control over my future. My focus was on building a life with Dean, pursuing our dreams, and finding happiness in the present. The past was a part of me, but it no longer defined my future. Update 3. Months had passed. Dean and I continued to pour our energy into our restaurant project. The initial excitement of starting something new had given way to the steady work of building and managing a business. Despite the challenges, we were both deeply invested in making our dream a reality. One day, as I was catching up on work emails, I received a letter in the mail that took me by surprise. It was from my brother Ian. In his letter, he described a recent turn of events with my parents that left me feeling a swirl of emotions. Ian had been trying to keep his distance from our parents after our last meeting, but their situation had become even more dire. They were struggling to stay afloat and had reached out to him desperate for any form of assistance. He detailed their financial struggles and their attempts to make amends for the past. My parents had been showing up at his doorstep. Ian had been torn. He felt the weight of their past actions and his own sense of duty to his family. He shared that despite their ongoing desperation, they had been trying to improve themselves. They sought counseling and were taking steps to address their financial issues more responsibly. The sincerity in their efforts seemed genuine to him, but he admitted he was still skeptical about their true intentions. Reading Ian's letter, I felt a pang of conflicted emotions. Part of me wanted to dismiss their efforts as too little too late, but another part wondered if there was a chance for something better. The old wounds were still fresh, but the thought of them making an honest effort to change sparked a flicker of curiosity. I decided to reach out to Ian to discuss his letter further. We arranged a phone call, during which he encouraged me to consider giving my parents another opportunity to prove themselves. He assured me that he would be there to support me through the process and help ensure that any future interactions would be on fair terms. I took some time to think about it. My initial instinct was to maintain my distance, to avoid reopening old scars. But as I reflected on the possibility of them genuinely seeking redemption, I found myself wrestling with a sense of responsibility. The idea of providing them with a chance to make amends, while still setting firm boundaries, began to take shape. After much contemplation, I reached out to my parents with cautious optimism. I agreed to meet with them again, but this time I was firm about my conditions. I wanted to see concrete evidence of their commitment to change and a clear plan for addressing their financial troubles. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, one that allowed for a controlled and transparent conversation. When we met, my parents were noticeably different. They seemed more composed, and their apologies carried a weight of seriousness I hadn't seen before. They presented me with a detailed plan for their financial recovery and demonstrated the steps they had been taking to seek professional help. Their efforts to reconcile were palpable, and, for the first time, I saw a glimmer of the people they might have been if circumstances had been different. It wasn't easy to navigate this renewed interaction. I had to balance my desire for some form of closure with the reality of their past actions. The meeting was a delicate dance of honesty and guarded hope. I communicated that while I was open to helping them with some financial assistance, it was not a gateway to resuming our previous relationship. Any future interactions would be carefully managed and contingent on their continued efforts to improve themselves. Leaving the meeting, I felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. It was as if a chapter had been partially closed, but the book wasn't entirely finished. My parents' response was a mixture of gratitude and understanding, and I hoped that their newfound commitment would lead to positive changes. As for me, life continued to evolve. The restaurant was progressing well, Dean and I were enjoying the journey together. The past remained a part of my story, but it no longer held me back. I was learning to navigate the complex terrain of family dynamics while focusing on the present and future. The path ahead was uncertain, but I felt equipped to face it with a cautious but hopeful heart. Thanks for tuning in to today's Reddit story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on more amazing stories. See you next time.